This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. Information at vachamber.com. Virginia hospitals and health systems provide jobs. They support our economy and promote public health. Local hospitals are always open to help people with unexpected health needs. Having a stable healthcare network is vital. Virginia hospitals are our lifeline.
I just received a letter from a student who thanked me for instilling the love of math in him. That's why I teach.
Brought to you by the Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
Welcome to This Week in Richmond, and a very special welcome to Delegate Dr. Scott Garrett. I'll tell our viewers that just before we started, we were talking about a former member of the General Assembly, John Miller, who died rather unexpectedly in the interim time between the last session and the one coming up. And you were talking some about education. Why don't you repeat some of the things you were just saying, and we'll have this short tribute to John Miller. And in fact, we can include in the tribute that the Cubs won the World Series.
Absolutely,
and
David.
He was waiting for that.
Surely. Well, thanks for having me on this week. John Miller was a great man with a great heart, and a true visionary in a quiet but resolved way. And John's vision was, with the advent of the internet and with instant access to information, particularly with our youth, that we need to redefine and rethink how K-12 education in the Commonwealth of Virginia will be structured going forth. So 20 years from now, 30 years from now, we may not be going until 12th grade with the same classes that you and I had. I just turned 60 this year, government and senior government and English literature and so forth. After about the 10th grade, these students seem to have access to the same sort of information that you and I had, going to the libraries and so forth. You just don't see that today. And I think in those last year or two, there'll be a much more structured path of either you're college bound, and those will be the students taking advanced placement and college preparatory classes, dual enrollment courses to take advantage of our great community college system and the affordability of a two-year associate degree as they try to define what their life's goal is, or you'll be in a vocational or tech educational track. Those will be the students that will be, by the time they graduate, will already have their certification to serve you and I as welders or electricians or plumbers or what have you. So that was John's vision, was to redefine and rethink how we, in fact, conduct our K-12 education in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Great man, he's sorely missed.
You know, thinking about career and technical ed, even in the medical field, it's amazing what is being taught, what's being learned by some of the high school students that probably without too many years passing, some of them will be coming out with some kind of a registration certification or something that would help them, again with community college, be able to be techs in different fields in medical.
Absolutely, and I think the great driver for that, David, is the aging of our population.
Right.
As we get more and more, the baby boomers, I'm in the baby boomers, probably you as well, as we age gracefully, our seasoned citizens, we will have a greater need as a society, as communities, to be able to address a lot of those fundamental challenges that they see. They're not just simply economic challenges, they're sociologic challenges. One piece of that is their health care, and as we age gracefully, our organs tend to age as well, our heart and lungs and liver and kidneys and so forth. So there are a lot of allied health professions that are tremendous opportunities. It's a wonderful a wonderful job, a wonderful lifestyle that folks can have, and they're providing a phenomenal and a sorely needed service. So I suspect we'll see even more of the healthcare providers that are willing to get out there and just look another human being in the eye and say, I care about you, and let's see what we can do to make today a better day.
Well, you and your colleagues, too, have worked to make it easier for people who've served in the military, who've come out with some good medical training / education and experience to be able to move into some areas of medicine.
Indeed, David, and I co-patron legislation we had 2 years ago that basically says if you your MOS, your occupation in the military, if you've served for 30 years as a corpsman in the Navy, and you may have been the only person on a submarine that's providing health care, by golly, when you come out and you come into the private sector, you shouldn't have to go spend another 4 years to simply to get certified in training that you had on the job for the last 30 years. If you drove heavy machinery in the Army, getting your commercial driver's license, your CDL, should not be a tremendous challenge for you. So going forward, Virginia does value our veterans, and as you know, that's been a key platform for former Governor McDonald, current Governor Terry McAuliffe, understanding that our veterans do matter. And a big piece of that is in the healthcare arena as well.
You know, in the healthcare arena, in the mental health area, that's something that you've been working on for some time and working even between sessions on mental health issues. Give us some updates on how you see things moving forward, and is it possible that we'll maybe see some legislation even in 17 or 18 that will continue to improve the mental health services?
So you asked several questions there. I serve on the Deeds Commission, otherwise called Senate Joint Bill 47 or SJ 47. That's been now 3 years in process. Our first 2 years were really information gathering, reaching out to the various providers and suppliers of mental health services, but as well the advocates and the consumers of those services, just trying to get our arms around what the problematic challenges are. Now we're moving into a phase where we're trying to figure out some of the solutions for the challenges that we've uncovered. Senator Deeds, who chairs the commission of his name, the Deeds Commission, established 4 working groups this past January. I'm blessed to chair one of those. My working group deals with crisis response and emergency services in mental health. So we're not looking necessarily at how do we prevent mental health challenges, and we're not looking at necessarily after they've been uncovered, discovered, and folks are now in the system. We're looking at that challenge time period where a family member or a coworker, what have you, may uncover or discover that there may be a challenge, and how do we get that individual into our system. There's a second working group that I anticipate we may well see legislation this 2017 that Senator Janet Howell from Fairfax is chairing, and that's to look at housing issues with our intellectually challenged community. This is clearly recognized as a big problem. We can address some of their medical needs, but if we're not addressing some of the other sociologic needs, is there a void there that needs to be addressed? A third area, and sadly several tragedies in our jail system have raised this. Delegate Rob Bell from Albemarle is chairing a work group to look at mental health in our jail system. Ever increasingly, it's apparent that our jails are becoming the repository of a lot of folks that have some intellectual challenges that confront them, whether it's substance abuse or whether it's truly organic neurologic disorders. And we're trying to get our arms around how we as a Commonwealth address that. And then lastly, Senator Emmett Hanger from Augusta is chairing a working group looking at the entire system and how do we pay for it. His group really, and my group, probably won't have large substantive efforts until 2018. to the issues that we are going to be addressing this year. One is looking at alternate transportation models. How do we, particularly for our south side, southwest Virginia, along the valley, large counties with very smaller sheriff's law enforcement departments, how do they more efficiently transport folks to the centers where they can be received and therefore be diagnosed and treated? And then a second piece, and you mentioned this earlier, is the millennials and how they get information and their future in healthcare. That second piece is going to be specifically telepsychiatry, but telemedicine, the concept of providing some of those healthcare services from the distance. And we'll be working through some of those issues, hopefully this year and into next year as well.
To go back to the transportation issue for just a moment and flesh it out a bit more for our viewers, I think I'm right, and you'll fill it in, that if someone from the sheriff's department is doing that transporting, and it's an area where there are not that many sheriffs in certain shifts, that then it can be problematic. Does that pull everyone off of other law enforcement, or what is the issue trying to get solved on that?
So that is the crux of it. You might have a county down in Southside Virginia or Southwest Virginia that might only have 2 deputies on call for on the night shift for the entire county. They might have a 911 call that my grandson is here in the kitchen with a knife and he's threatening to harm himself. And that's a true emergency.
Yes.
The law enforcement will respond. And because it's a potential armed individual, probably both of those individuals will respond. When they get there and they have the conversations and they realize that something is amiss and needs to be transported, they might have to transport that individual an hour and a half, 2 hours away to a receiving emergency room that has the psychiatric capacity to respond to that. So that's an hour and a half or 2 hours driving time, and then they sit and wait in that setting to provide security, provide the appropriate safety address the appropriate safety concerns for several hours until they're finally released from that hospital system to be able to return to their home counties. Meanwhile, their counties are being underserved, and it's a manpower issue for sure. It is what's the best utilization for our law enforcement officers issue. We're still working through some of those issues. I've been working jointly with the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services and the Department of Criminal Justice Services to try to figure out exactly where's the sweet spot with how should those transports be most efficiently managed. And then as an aside, the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services this year had a pilot project in the Mount Rogers Community Service Board, which is in the far southwestern tip of Virginia. They looked at, I think, around 700 transports. Half of those were transported by an alternate source, someone in an unmarked vehicle, just a person in khakis without the stigma or the challenge, not handcuffed and so forth. And they had a 100% safety margin. There was no elopement, person didn't leave,
Oh, that's excellent.
and there were no safety issues raised. So we're going to be looking at that model, perhaps considering expanding that model, perhaps and piloting it in other areas to see how can we address law enforcement's concerns, safety concerns, and obviously the needs for individuals when arguably they're at their most vulnerable and challenged times.
Because apart from that, then we go back to the problem that was there for some time of just being housed in jails.
That's
If
right.
they were not transported somewhere, they were just put in a jail, in a cell, and which really could just make the problem worse.
Absolutely. And that is one of the challenges that we're trying to try to fully understand the scope of it and the extent of it, and to be able to figure out how do we best apply and most efficiently apply the resources that we have. It's a big challenge, but thankfully we've got a lot of citizen legislators that are up to the task.
Right. Going back to the housing for just a moment and getting off to a slightly different subject, being from Central Virginia and even prior to your retirement, you provided some services at Central Virginia Training Center. And while that's not the same as the mental health concerns that you were talking about, but it is an issue that certainly confronts people with real severe needs in their family, and and the challenge of what will the Commonwealth do in the coming years to provide those services.
So you mentioned the Central Virginia Training Center. In its day, back in the 50s and 60s, there were over 3,500 folks that resided at the Central Virginia Training Center, a several hundred acre property in Amherst County. And they had a full working beef and dairy cattle farm, and they farmed all their own vegetables, made their own milk, cheese, and so forth and so on. And fast forward to today, that was a different day and time.
Sure.
And there are less than 200 folks now that reside at Central Virginia Training Center, and they are extraordinarily medically fragile, not just simply intellectually challenged, but there's a tremendous amount of intensive care needs that they have. The folks that have been transitioned out of their, not just Central Virginia Training Center, but our other 4 training centers as well around the Commonwealth, they've been able to transition into different sorts of housing opportunities, and we've been able to wrap around them the services that they need to fundamentally optimize their lives, frankly. We've yet to really come to grips with what that's going to look like for the 170 some folks that are still reside at CVTC, again, because of the medical fragility. When you're on a ventilator, when you're getting feeding tubes, when you have the risk of regurgitating and aspirating or getting pneumonias and on a moment-by-moment basis and needing a great deal of intensive care to manage some of our folks, it's going to be very difficult for us to make sure that we've accomplished all of what we need to accomplish again, these are some of our most challenged Virginians.
You know, another issue, and while the decisions are still being made, and we'll tell our viewers that actually you're here in Richmond today in part because of your Certificate of Public Need study, COPN. So without knowing just exactly how that's going to be worked out, what are the thorny issues that you and your colleagues are trying to resolve with regards to public need and then certifications?
So David, for your viewers, the Certificate of Public Need process was put into place in the mid-70s, and it was an effort on this Commonwealth's part to try to address the challenges in some of our less affluent counties with access to care. Again, 40 years ago they put into place this process, and the process requires, if you wish to, I think there are 17 specifically delineated facilities that if you want to build an ambulatory surgery center, if you want to build a dialysis unit, if you want to add operating room bed capacity to a facility, you have to request and file an application for a Certificate of Public Need, that is ultimately signed on by the Commissioner of Health. And that's an affirmation that in fact your community needs those resources. That was 40 years ago. It was put into place at a different day and time to try to address some of the disparity in access to care. Fast forward to today, there's a lot of changes have happened in the capacity to be able to provide those services, and those laws have become quite dated. We are in a process of trying to determine how do we effectively reform that process so that we can more efficiently and effectively meet the needs of those communities, and yet not at the same time hopefully make more of a free market perspective from the part of the businesses that wish to provide those services and the consumers that wish to consume those services. So we've been working through this for quite some time. We had legislation that passed through the House last year to significantly reform the Certificate of Public Need process. It went to the Senate, and it was felt like they needed more time to study some of these different elements. They established a workforce that's meeting today for the first time this afternoon to begin to work through some of those issues and which of the elements truly don't need a Certificate of Public Need. If you're a hospital and you want to add parking lot space and you have to get a Certificate of Public Need, there's no true need for the public. That's a business decision that you as a hospital need to make. On the other hand, the ambulatory surgery centers and so forth are opportunities for others to come into your community, other hospital systems to come into your community, and potentially, if we don't put into place a proper checks and balances to assure that the indigent care part of that is being addressed, then that creates some economic challenges for our hospitals. So there are a lot of moving parts to this that are still yet to be defined and completely worked out yet.
And probably the indigent care is probably one of the key things, because our
Yes, sir.
viewers should know that hospitals would have to provide that, but an ambulatory facility coming in under current law may not have to. Is that correct?
That's basically correct. And those are federal requirements that if someone shows up at your doorstep, if you purport to be an emergency department and someone shows up at your doorstep, you have an obligation to at least stabilize if you can't provide the level of care. But you do have those obligations. And whenever the Commonwealth of Virginia, which does, in my humble opinion, a great job working through our own code and our own statutory challenges, but when we have the encumbrance of federal regulations on top of that, and particularly a federal milieu that just seems to want to change about every 4 or 8 years, then it makes it very difficult for us to define a long-term solution that'll last us for decades. But that's the task that we are about.
Well, a reminder of viewers that we're having a conversation on the 28th of November. They're seeing this show in early December, so they maybe will have seen something in their newspaper about your meeting today. But regardless of that, it'll be an issue that certainly, as the House had worked on it in the past session, and perhaps the House and the Senate this coming session to try to work something out. Let's move over to another area in which you serve in the Appropriations Committee. Tough year, tough session coming up for Appropriations Committee and Senate Finance Committee to look at what will you do working with the governor and all together to trim some of what was to have been spent in the second year of the budget.
So I don't want to get too deep in the woods, but sure. The last biennial or the last 2-year budget for the Commonwealth of Virginia was about $98 billion. The current biennial budget is $106 billion. The budget for the Commonwealth of Virginia has grown by roughly $4 billion a year, $8 billion over 2 years. And yet the revenue for the Commonwealth of Virginia, its general fund, which 2/3 of which is, or 80% of which is personal income tax and sales and use revenue tax, has only grown at about 1.7%. The growth in that extra revenues that we have appropriated has been in non-general funds, which is typically federal monies and things that Virginians pay for, like tuition and fees at colleges and so forth, lottery proceeds and so forth, things that we choose to make as consumers make those choices. One of the challenges that we have is we've predicated a lot of what we've appropriated on a consistent and reliable source of revenue. And when that is the federal government, and obviously an election that we just had 2-3 weeks or so ago has changed that entire the entire playing field for the access to federal revenues. We've yet to hear from the new administration how it intends to address healthcare dollars. How does it intend to address transportation dollars? And what in fact is it going to do with national security and Department of Defense dollars? Those 3 baskets of federal dollars are critically important to our revenues from the Commonwealth of Virginia's perspective to then be able to pay for our public education, our teachers, our public safety, our deputies, and Virginia State Police, as you know, are hugely challenged right now. Our public transportation, our roads and bridges and so forth, and the congestion that's got to be mitigated in Northern Virginia and Tidewater particularly. We were talking earlier about that. Yes. And as well, public health and the need we have for access to true health care, not just simply an insurance card, but true health care. So I think there's a lot of question marks. I don't know that we'll have great clarity before we come back into session here in 6 weeks, I guess, 8 weeks or so in the second week in January. I'm not so sure by then we will know what the federal plan is. But so with all that uncertainty, it's like any other business. When we have certainty, our businesses work quite well. Right. When there's uncertainty, we are greatly challenged. So we will be spending a lot of time on the ninth floor in the House Appropriations Committee trying to make sure we do have the right balance from a conservative perspective, making sure we don't overspend simply if for no other reason we have a constitutional requirement for a balanced budget.
Thank you very much, and look forward to having you back on. Our time has expired.
Absolutely, David. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community. For jobs, the economy, and public health, Virginia Hospitals, our lifeline.
The Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.